Thank you, Mireille, and good morning, everybody. For climate, alignment means that we must take all measures to be on track with the Paris Agreement goals. Shortly said, carbon neutrality by 2050 and adaptation. For the financial industry, it needs to, what is required by the Article 2C of the agreement, it requires to make all financial flows consistent with these targets. Alignment is a word which evokes to me something like an elegant duck's flight, which is rather demanding if you compare it with the very messy current situation. And so we thought it was deserving the first discussion, the first panel discussion of this Climate Finance Day. I think you all received the short stock take of Finance for Tomorrow and Climate Change on climate finance for 2019. The main takeaway is that, unfortunately, it's impossible to assess a real shift in capital flows. Indeed, the climate finance flows increase was 25% on average the last 5 years. But in the meantime, the size of finance to harming activities, namely investment in fossil fuels, is the double of climate finance flows. And most important thing is that it's not yet decreasing. So the shift is not possible to see now. It's not reducing yet. It's sadly consistent, in fact, with the recent findings of the last UNEP's emission gap report. But recently, during the COP24 and the UN Climate Action Summit last September, very major financial institutions committed to align all their activities with the Paris goals, individually as well as by joining coalition. This is the case of all our panelists today, this morning. A brilliant mix of major public and private financial actors. Karine van Gennip, you are the CEO of ING France and former minister in the Netherlands. You will talk indeed on behalf of the whole ING group today. ING is one of the bank signatories of the Katowice Pledge, and you will explain what it consists of. François Riahi, you are the Natixis CEO and a member of the management board of BPCE Group. Natixis is the wholesale arm of Group BPCE. Beyond its banking activities, Natixis is involved in the asset management, insurance, and payment businesses. You are also a signatory of the Principles for Responsible Banking, which purpose is to align with the Paris Agreement and with the SDGs. I'm coming to the Development Bank. Jürgen Kern, you are the Director of Corporate Strategy and Sustainability at KfW Group. Rémi Rioux, you are the Chief Executive Officer of Agence Française de Développement and Chair of IDFC, the Association of Bilateral and Domestic Development Banks. And KfW is also, of course, a member of IDFC. Members of the IDFC, as well as the multilateral banks, have committed to align with the Paris Agreement. And finally, our insurer and major institutional investor in the panel, Matthias Sewald, you are the CIO of Allianz France. Thank you for representing today the whole Allianz Group. Allianz is a founding member of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, launched last September with a few other institutional investors. We were joined 2 days ago by four more investors. So the first set of questions will be on the definitions, on your respective definition. Commitments to align with the Paris Agreement is relatively recent. It's not yet mainstream. And what does it mean for your institution? And can I start with you, Rémi? Because Agence Française de Développement, in fact, has been the first financial institution to announce this kind of commitments. It was in 2017, if I remember well, and you announced that you will align your strategy to the Paris Agreement. What does it mean for you?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Pierre, for the introduction and for the invitation to this green and just Friday. Yes, let me tell you a few words on our journey at AFD. So it started around 2005 when we decided that climate had to be at the same strategic level as poverty reduction, which is the mandate, the historic mandate of development banks. So just transition rings a bell at AFD strongly for nearly 15 years now. Then we progressively increased the share of our financing that is providing climate co-benefits. Now we've reached more than 50% of our financing, so it makes more than the 5 billion mark that was committed by President Hollande at COP21 as the French commitment to climate finance, the 100 billion of Copenhagen. But then we asked ourselves, what about the other 50%? Are we allowed to finance coal or anything we want with the rest of our financing? And that's where we started to try to find the right strategy, the frontier, after Paris, after COP21. And you're right, we phrased it in 2017 as we commit to be 100% Paris Agreement, meaning alignment of our whole portfolio. To make it operational, we have developed two elements internally. So first, of course, we have an analysis and opinion mechanism independent from operations that filters all the projects we accompany and verify that they are consistent with the strategy, both on the social, I would say, and the environmental side. But we added something else, which is an analysis of the trajectories set by the countries, their NDCs, and beyond, their long-term 2050 carbon neutrality strategy, because you need both somehow at the micro project level and at the country territorial, as Laurent Berger stated, level and reconcile the two. And I take the opportunity to express a view, which is there's a dramatic missing link for the financial sector, which is that nobody, for now, is sending signals to the market, to development banks, on long-term trajectories. This is the core of the Paris Agreement we negotiated in 2015. So for now, clearly, we don't know if France, Indonesia, Burkina Faso, Colombia is going in the right direction or not. We don't know. We are receiving all day long signals on short-term issues, public finance, macroeconomics, financial stability. It's called the IMF. And our institutions, we are following mechanically the IMF signal. If a country goes in the wrong direction, we stop lending, and we turn to grants, for instance, without even asking ourselves if it's the right way to do it. We don't know for long term. We don't know for long term. So there's an urgent need, and it's not only for development banks, it's for finance. to receive signals, credible signals, assessing the credibility of the long-term trajectory. So can be the IMF, can be the World Bank, can be the UN. I mean, personally, I don't care. I just want for this signal to start being emitted. Last point, of course, it's not only about AFD only. These issues of alignment are at the core of the discussion within the IDFC club. So we have colleagues from KfW in the room, Sven is here, others. We had this commitment, you're right, at the One Planet Summit in 2017. And we are working on how to operationalize it for all members of IDFC. So, you know, IDFC, this is this very unique group of the 26 now largest national and regional development banks. So it's not the multilateral layers, you know, it's the other one. So KfW, AFD, with colleagues from Caisse des Dépôts, of course, very close. JICA, BNDES in Brazil, China Development Bank, DBSA in South Africa. So somehow instruments able to finance climate and SDGs in their own constituency and in international cooperation. It's big, it's more than $500 billion on a yearly basis, average. Already 150 on average for climate. Willing, I think I'm their chair, so I know, willing to receive a stronger mandate to align with Paris and SDGs. That's where we stand, and we want to have a stronger voice to help. And of course, these instruments, as you know, we know very well in France with Caisse des Dépôts, we are public instruments, so we hear the message clearly, and especially AFD, because we are very close to international fora, but we are deeply rooted in our countries, in our constituency, and historically we connect public and private, helping building markets, emitting green bonds, pushing this idea of alignment for the common good.
Thank you, Rémi. Jürgen. So, as Rémi said, you are also a member of the IDFC. You're committed to align too. In your vision, what are the options for Paris alignment on Paris?
Okay. Bon, d'abord, bonjour à tout le monde. Merci pour l'invitation. Je suis très contente d'être ici sur cette importante conférence. So, about your question, what are the options of Paris alignment? We are, as AFD, a development bank, but somehow different. We work in 100 countries worldwide, but also in Germany. And 2/3 of our commitments are in Germany. So we maybe have a different approach. So our journey is I think, pretty similar. We are part of IDFC and committed to align to the Paris Agreement, and we are coming from a very good track record. Already 40% of our annual commitments are dedicated to green projects, which is fine, but we all agree that more work has to be done. So we started a project, or rather to say the board commissioned a big project. I will elaborate on that later on in KfW, which we call Roadmap Sustainable Finance. And in this project, we made an exercise to evaluate what could be options of Paris alignment. That is your question. So there's a lot of margin of interpretation in the agreement, and we found like 3 prototypes of how you could align. The first one would be, because the idea is to align financial flows to the goals of the agreement. So you could say a development bank is a bank, and the role of a bank is to be a liquidity provider. So whatever the governments decide on their track, we have to provide the liquidity, take the risk, etc., etc. So we looked on that approach, and we said, yes, that's true, that can be an interpretation, but maybe the level of ambition is not so high for a development bank. Then we looked on the NDC approach, which makes sense as to where are the countries heading towards, and where do they stand, and is my project, or that what I will finance, in line, which is in the national determined contribution of that very country. So we looked on that and said, okay, this has, let's say, a couple of challenges. First of all, you have to evaluate all the NDCs of the 100 countries in which you are working. But the harder part is we also would have to evaluate whether Germany is on track with the NDC, which is very difficult to evaluate the performance of your shareholder. So we said, okay, NDC approach is a good approach, but maybe complicated and not really feasible in our, let's say, special context. Then we said, okay, what about if we become greenhouse gas neutral in our portfolio by 2050? And not only, what about if we become CO2 neutral in 2050, but also what do we have to do in 2020, 25, 30, etc. This makes sense, but we don't know then in this approach what is the impact on the countries. No? The best maybe question is how feasible is it? Is a poor Paris approach, how we call it, is to prove that your activities assure the attainment of the 2-degree goal. This implies to know what the countries are doing. This implies to know what other donors are doing. And this implies good metrics. So at the end, our approach would be, which is not finalized yet, we want to become greenhouse gas neutral in our portfolio. So number 3, despite that this is limited to what we are doing, we think this is a good approach because it is feasible, it is concrete, and as we have huge commitments, we commit around about 80 billion per year, we are sure that we will have an impact on what is happening in the climate, or in the climate worldwide. So maybe if you allow, how can you do this? And I will elaborate much more on that later on, because it's not easy, even if you choose this way. So you need to have a sound measurement of your portfolio in place. Difficult, but feasible. You have to include this in the bank management, because if you say the managers become CO2 neutral, so I say, okay, I shut down my business, then I'm immediately CO2 neutral, but that's not the idea. So you have to link it with the other KPIs. And then you have to define the role of the development bank is how much you engage in political dialogue, etc., etc. So that's what we thought in our project about the options of Paris alignment.
Thank you. François, is the alignment issue completely different for you? I mean, does the market allow you to align?
Thank you, Pierre. Well, actually, I think we are in a special moment where we don't see any pushback from the market on all our initiatives. So we have different initiatives in the BPC group, in Natixis, on targeting capital seekers or capital providers. We have 70 billion euro under management on ESG strategies, and we see a strong appetite. That's a priority, a business priority for us. That's where we see a lot of growth coming. On the retail demand that was named by Thierry Deo, we have 3.3 billion euro of sustainable products from the retail, but we have also committed to manage the portfolio of our insurance companies, so the savings of Caisse d'Épargne and Banque Populaire clients, which are 50 billion euro on a 2-degree trajectory, and we are doing it. And it's the first year we are in line with our targets, and so the market perfectly allows us to do so. We had committed to invest 10 billion in 3 years in renewable energy and sustainable buildings. We are already at 9 billion in 2 years, so we are ahead on our trajectory. So yes, the market allows us to reach our targets. Now, I think the market today is expecting guidance. That's what is interesting. We are in a moment where we need to shape the market about long-term signals. That's what Rémi was saying. In terms of, the financial market is usually guided by numbers, by financial statements. and what we are talking about is not included fully in the numbers. So there's a real awareness that things need to change. The question is, at what extent, to what extent, and for that, the market still needs guidance. It still needs instruments, needs measurements. And that's what we are trying to do, is really to change this market, so that, because so far we have been focusing on green finance on the two extremes, I would say, on what is, funding with green instrument is the greenest, and restricting, retrenching from the most polluting part of the industries. But we have now to address the full market and to give a guidance on the full market. That's the task we have ahead of us. It's very tough, but that's where the alignment is exactly the question. We have a trajectory to align with, so it gives us the opportunity of a reference. Now we need the measure and the signals to make financial decisions align with this trajectory. Thierry was saying it a little bit earlier. It's not easy. We don't have a full scope of numbers, of principles, of methodology. Work is in progress, but it's not because work is in progress that we don't act. So what we see is when we act, the market is receiving it positively. So I think the market allows us to go further.
Thank you. Karine? So I mentioned the Katowice pledge last year. How do you implement this commitment strategy?
Thank you also for inviting ING here. I think for us, as a bank, it's always been very important for many years to address climate change. But since many years we've been looking at our own footprint. But the footprint of a bank is really small. So the answer is, and that's what we're all doing, is using your balance sheet to basically decide who you're going to give a loan, who you don't give a loan, and what type of loan you can push actually clients to move on climate change. And we do that because we believe it's necessary for society, but also because we believe, and we see the first evidence for that sustainable companies, in the end, are winners. In the end, are longer-term performers than non-sustainable companies. So we've worked loan by loan, country by country, to become greener and to make our clients greener. But then last year we said, that's not enough. We need to look at our portfolio from a holistic perspective. And that's what we call the Terra approach. And we committed ourselves to really be transparent about it, to steer our whole loan book, 600 billion, towards the Paris Agreement. But then we realized that's all great, but that's still only 600 billion. We need to find other banks to join that same pledge to steer the whole portfolio well below the 2-degree agreement. And we found last year 4 other banks. BBVA was there from the beginning, Standard Chartered, and 2 French banks, SocGen and BNP, to co-sign with us in Katowice, this Katowice agreement, where the 5 of us together pledged we will move our whole loan book portfolio to really work towards the below 2-degree Paris Agreement. And that together is 2.4 trillion loan book. So we're getting there. And today we actually have 12 or 13 even signatories to this pledge, to this Katowice agreement, and that really helps move things forward.
Yeah, thank you. Matthias.
And of course we invite all the other banks who haven't signed up yet to sign as well.
Matthias, I mentioned the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance that you are one of the founder. Can you tell us what is this alliance, and why did you join it?
Thank you, Pierre. From our perspective, there's 2 guiding convictions that have led us, and I think all the others, not only the founding, but also the new members of this alliance, to join. And one is the conviction that finance, and in particular asset owners, need to do something. They need to support strongly and visibly and with concrete actions the transition that needs to take place towards a net emission, a net zero world that we all need and that we all want to achieve by 2050. The second conviction is, and I found it very interesting that Monsieur Grégoire mentioned that as well for the city of Paris, independent of how big we may be as individual institutions, we will not achieve this if we stay and work and act on our own. I think alignment, collaboration is key, and we want to use this shared basis of goals, of objectives among asset owners to align better and to work together. We saw this already as an internationally, as a globally operating insurance company, how difficult it can be to align on targets for changing the setup, the structure of portfolios in all the different countries where we're active. France is very much advanced based also on this very modern and forward-looking legal and regulatory environment. There's other countries, when you look into Asia, when you look into South America, where it's not the same situation, and we simply need to constantly discuss, constantly work together in order to get to this objective. And we are in particular happy that this initiative, this alliance, is now happening under the sponsorship, under the backing of the United Nations, so that gives this whole activity additional weight.
Yes, it was a very outstanding initiative. And I mentioned the fact that 2 days ago 4 more members were joining this alliance, which the Caisse des Dépôts, and excuse me, allow me to say it because I'm very proud of it, is also a founding member.
Which gives additional weight to the French part of this alliance, as it's 4 French institutions that have joined. We are very proud already to be with Caisse des Dépôts from the beginning, but now with CNP, Assurance, with AXA, with Aviva, and with the Fonds de Retraite, 2 more or 4 more heavyweights in the French market in particular as well.
Yeah, it was an important milestone of this Paris for Tomorrow week. Let's go to the second one, the question about implementation, because you see, we see that these commitments are recent. They take stock on what has already been done by the institutions. They go further how to implement this complex strategy. And so, François, Natixis is now really well known and famous for your new climate decision tool, the green weighting factor. Do you think it's an alignment tool?
Sure, it's exactly that. We decided to move that way a few 2 years ago, actually, and it was really, preparing for the Climate Finance Day of 2017. So it was announced exactly during this event 2 years ago. It has taken us more than 18 months to implement it, because it's about being very granular on what is really the impact on the environment of every loan we are making. And this is very tough. This has required a lot of work from our teams. Some are in the room, so I thank them for that. It has been a great effort. And we didn't have a taxonomy about what is really the impact of all the different type of things we were financing, which we had to develop internally, but also with some experts, external experts. And we have been able to have now in our systems an assessment of the environmental impact of every loan we have in our portfolio, every loan we are considering. This goes on a scale of 7 shades, 3 shades of green, 3 shades of brown, and a gray one, which is really, for me, very important because it's about transition. If you move from dark brown to neutral, that's great, even if you don't go to dark green. It's a part of the transition. So that's really what, for us, is the way to monitor if our balance sheet is addressing the transition or not. So we give this rating, and then this rating translates into a cost of capital, well, a quantity of capital which is different. So if it's a brown transaction, if it's assessed brown, then you have to add on risk-weighted asset. It means it's more costly. If it's green, you remove green risk-weighted asset. It means it's less costly. So there's a strong incentive for our bankers, for our business lines, to shift our balance sheet with a real measurement tool. This is, for me, of course, it's not perfect, and I'm sure we can have debates on how we assess this or that financing, but we prefer to move and to act rather than to waiting for the perfect framework. And now I can tell you, I'm chairing the credit committee of Natixis. Every loan, I know what is the impact on environment before I say yes or no to this loan. And we have a full picture of our portfolio. So it's now we are not done, because when you have this measurement tool, the question is to set targets. So if we want to align, what is the extent of shift we need to do? And what is the pace of this shift? That's very complex to establish. So we say, okay, we take 1 more year to set targets. But of course, once you have done this and once you have published your portfolio, you can only progress.
And we see that it's impacting the relationship with the customer.
Sure. We received, a lot of warm welcome, actually, by our customers, and a lot of interest, and a lot of clients. I can tell you that when I meet the CEOs of the large companies that we are financing, usually, a large part of the meeting is about transition. That's really on top of their agenda.
Good news.
Because they are afraid of not being able to have the financing they need for the next years. And the CEO of a large company has to think about, is my company still capable to be here in 10 years? So it's on top of their agenda. And the fact that we have this tool, they ask a lot of questions. What is my color? How can I improve it? And so on, which shows that we are at this time, I was mentioning about things are changing. Of course, we don't see it enough in the numbers, but they are changing in the awareness, and that's the perfect time to really push for action.
Thank you, Karine. About this relationship with the customers, why are you driving it?
Well, first of all, I think the green weighting factor that Natixis has developed or is still developing is really interesting. What we have done in the past couple of years is the so-called sustainability improvement loan. Until 3 years ago, we did a lot of, and we still do, green loans, so investing in green energy, in real green projects. But then, of course, the question becomes, if you are a company, a normal company who doesn't do green energy, do you get rewarded for being more sustainable? Do you actually get a better rate, a better interest rate from your bank? Like when you're more creditworthy, you get better conditions as well. So we said 2.5 years ago, yes, we can do that. We believe that sustainability is a driving factor in performance, but also we believe we need to drive this transition. So we launched the Sustainability Improvement Loan. The first one was with Philips in the Netherlands. That was in March 2017. And a couple of weeks later, it was EDF here in France. Now, what is a Sustainability Improvement Loan? It's a loan for general use. It's a loan to any company, but you get better conditions if you have a higher sustainability ambition. So it also means that a company who is not very sustainable, but who has huge ambitions, get better conditions as well. In the beginning, we used to rate that with the use of an external agency. We have several, Sustainalytics, EcoVadis. That proved to be quite burdensome. So also there we did some innovation. And about a year ago, we launched the first sustainable improvement loan, again with EDF, based on their internal KPIs. By the way, together with Natixis and 10 other banks. So also there you see that we're pushing how to develop this sustainability improvement loan. Now we've done more than 50, I think, more than a dozen in the French market, some of them bilateral, some of them with big groups. And over the past 2.5 years, you've seen where first we had to push it in the market. Then very interestingly, when we talked about sustainability 2-3 years ago, we were always talking to the head of sustainability and somebody in the finance team. Suddenly I had the CFO at the table because money was on the table. If he, often a she, by the way, if she would do her sustainability well, she would get a discount from us. And today, as Francis also said, it's more CEO Sache. It's really chef Sache, and that's very good.
Thank you. Matthias, as an investor, you have a scope of possibilities to try to reach a net zero portfolio, exclusion, engagement, investing in greening, and so on, with a big discussion on the real effect on the economy of these different tools. What is your experience in Alliance? How do you implement in your portfolio building the alignment strategy?
You're absolutely right. And there's there's a number of important constraints, not the least being that we are subject to the Solvency II regime and other regulatory requirements, and we are a liability-driven investor. So you need to apply a whole range of measures in order to align the portfolio with the goals. And while 2050 seems far away, given the size of the portfolios, the objective is very ambitious, and work and action needs to start now. So our first really based on the internal organization was that we included ESG considerations, and that means not just climate, but the whole range of environmental, social, and governance criteria into the value chain of our investment activity. So from asset manager selection via the portfolio management, in the end also to the reporting part, we're looking at where do we invest, and do the partners that we work with share the same goals, do things in a way that is aligned with our objectives. And in the end, we measure. This is clearly where data availability, where the capacity to develop models still needs to develop. This is where we have to put more into it, and where also I think the alignment with other partners comes into play, because in order to present a joint view, I think we need to make sure that our measures are aligned with other asset owners and other market participants. What is also key, and that's why I'm grateful that the word client was mentioned a number of times now. We don't invest because we consider it a great activity to do, but we have a fiduciary responsibility towards the clients on the life insurance side, to clearly the shareholder on the P&C insurance side more pronouncedly. And we need to make sure to take clients along with us on this way. And while there's a majority in France, for example, that believes that, yes, I want to invest my money responsibly when it comes to concrete actions, the percentages come down very significantly. And one of the experience I had when we first published our Article 173 report was that I read it and I said, no one ever will understand that who is not a specialist already in this field. So we need to communicate more, we need to be more clear in what we want to do, and we need to take the client along with us, meaning working with distribution, working with product development, and see how more and more we bring our criteria also into this client view. There is, in particular, again here in France, very important initiatives that support this. But it's clearly, it is an investment function job, but not an investment function job alone and on its own.
Thank you. Can we take a sensitive example, fossil fuels? I mean, we know that there are harming activities and that we must get rid of them at the end of the story in 2050, but we cannot do it at once. But let's take a sensitive example. How do you deal with the question of gas, for example?
Let me start with one step earlier, and that is the exclusion of companies from our investment portfolio that have a majority of their business model built on coal. So we did take this first step. And then comes into play what I would consider also a much larger view that does include this aspect of making sure that our action on climate have a social component as well, because we do need already today, and we will need even further going forward, energy sources to support the transition. And I think gas is one of the energy sources that will be needed. Dependency varies from country to country, but clearly it is not an energy where we say we need to and we should completely exclude it. We are specifically invested in gas distribution networks that can also be used for other energy sources, and we do hope that this will be the case going forward. In addition, and I just want to mention this because we also made reference to different partners in the Asset Owner Alliance, I think the goal is, and we show this, and in particular, it's again an initiative where we are very grateful that Caisse des Dépôts here in France has been leading this, Fonds Ambition Climat, investing into companies that specifically support with their activity this climate transition, this energy transition, and help us to achieve the goals. And that's the positive aspect that we also, I think, need to focus on.
It was also a very important announcement of last week, just before this Paris for Tomorrow week. Remy, 2 weeks ago, the EIB announced a very ambitious energy strategy in which they exclude financing of all new fossil projects by 2021. We understood that l'Agence Française de Développement aligned to country goals, but do you have also sectorial policies? And what about energy?
So we, of course, as all of you in the room, we are following very closely the debate and what happens at EIB. Of course, we share the objective. We have to urgently decarbonize energy production by 2050 at the latest. We value the signal sent by EIB. I think EIB is, of course, part of this multilateral system I was referring in my first intervention that needs to address stronger signals to the markets. And of course, I value also the responsibility taken by the EIB board in that perspective. It echoes, of course, strategies that other public banks and private banks and actors are developing. So, of course, we have sectoral policies. At AFD, we excluded coal finance in 2013. We are restricting more and more eligible projects. The only maybe comment I want to add, and jumping on what the others said, is well, I'm more into reconciliation than exclusion. So exclusion lists are powerful, of course, as a signal, and I'm a bit always awkward where institutions, AFD included, are only talking about what they are providing, what is their offer, and the constraints they put on their offer. Because and that's fine, but and we see that there are many things happening on the offer side. But I think the real and the key issue right now is really to turn to the demand side, to turn to the clients, to turn to the other side, because what we all need is clients asking us financing for renewable projects rather than fossil fuel projects, as simple as that. And so I see the polemics on French banks and beyond. The question I want to ask is what are we doing to change the demand? What are we doing to redirect not only our flows but redirect the demand? And are we doing enough? And I hear people saying that the financial sector is not too big, rather it's too small, because probably there are not enough people on the ground helping clients, originating good investments. And what is the business model, of course, in a negative rate world for this? But this is what we need, and we need Laurent Berger. We need to be more active in the origination of projects. And I'm not sure it's a question that is totally shared and discussed and between public and private. And of course, as AFD, as a development bank, we are extremely attentive to it, because our mandate is to be on the side of the other and to help him as a stronger voice in the discussion. And I feel it very, very strongly as the chair of the IDFC, because you've understood that the Barry Center of IDFC is in the Global South. So the discussion, for instance, on the European taxonomy, on green finance, I mean, that's fine, of course. But what institutions from the developing world, where the fight will take place against climate change, where the returns to pay our future pensions will come from? Do they share the taxonomy? Do they agree? Is it simple, robust, enough? And what the clients are thinking about the taxonomy? Will they propose projects that are consistent with the taxonomy? Or is it only a thing that we are deciding by ourselves on the offer side? So sorry, but and of course, development banks, we have, and that's the taxpayer is giving us instruments, money to help strengthen, to have dialogue with governments, private sector, local authorities, civil society, in emerging markets, but maybe in our own countries as well. And sorry, that's the maybe what the development bank can provide to this discussion at the moment we are, and a very positive moment, because I think on the offer side we have understood, all of us, and there are many initiatives burgeoning to have our financing better, greener, stronger, more attentive. But now let's turn to the clients.
Yes, you're insisting on the transformative effect. In fact, I understand that. François, I'm sorry, I can't seem to stick on the gas issue, but it's because the five of you are beyond the coal issue. I mean, and about gas, you know, that's the problem of the transition and the transition energy, and so I would like to have the advice of François. But if you want, no, just if you want
just
to
to say, of course, we have clients in Africa, for instance. So you know what this issue on energy transition means for African countries, because there are 600 million people that have no access to energy. So it's a bit awkward to them, and they know, we know. I mean, the theme is just transition. So we know that we polluted. And so there's an issue of justice behind what we are talking about.
So how do you treat gas in the green weighting factor?
Pierre, I see that you have some insider information, because it has been a hot topic when we were preparing for the green weighting factor, and I found it very, very positive, because there were real debates, and that has been for us as an institution a great thing to implement this, is that all our bankers in every business line, in every geography, had to discuss about what is the impact on the environment, on what they are financing, on their clients' footprints, and they actually improved a lot in their understanding and awareness on the question, which for me is very positive for the future. But so gas has been a real debate because, and just let me say again that I think we are reaching the end of the restricting list being the main tool of greening the finance. Because if we continue to do that, then it will stop. On fossil fuels, it has been said before, it will be part of the transition. If we stop today all fossil fuels on the planet, we don't have enough energy. So the question is on the transition, at what pace fossil fuels will be reducing. So that's exactly for this type of questions that we have decided to move to the green weighting factor. So gas, we have decided that, and of course it's debatable, it can evolve, it's really, you know, at this stage, what we have decided is that it depends where you implement gas. If you create more gas in France, you are deteriorating the situation, then it's dark brown. If you do gas in a country which is relying on coal, you are improving the things. So it's better. So depending on the nature also of the factory, a lot of things, it's very, very complex, but we take into account the context. And I think that's also echoing what Rémi was saying about the fact that the transition will have to take into account where you start from. And that's what we try to do in our green weighting factor.
Thank you. Jürgen, donc François told that gas was a tricky question during the elaboration of the green weighting factor. I've really appreciated during your preparation that you were very outspoken about the difficulties you meet in elaborating your own alignment strategies. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, not to jump directly into the difficulties. So the question is how to get the alignment into place. And what my colleague also said, you need the tone from the top. You need the CEO to tell, I want the bank to become, and in our case, our CEO said the sustainability bank of the future. Sustainability in all the three dimensions. So social, economic, and ecological, and not the climate bank of the future. That makes a difference, and that's very important for us, development banks. Okay, so far so logical. I think everybody will agree on that. And in the second stage, you need resources and structure. How to get it into your system. That means in our case, in the project roadmap, Sustainable Finance, which was commissioned 1.5 years ago, we have around about 10 people working full-time on how to achieve this goal to become the sustainability bank of the future. So you put in resources on that, and the structure, that's also, I think, important, is given because it is in the corporate strategy department. It is not in communications or wherever you might find sustainability. So we have 5 working areas. I will go quickly through the mission statement, bank management, which is the most important, exclusion list, SDG, greenhouse gas accounting. Risk, we will report according to TCFD, governance, and communication. So, but your question, now the difficulties, and my colleague from AFD also mentioned it. So we opt for this holistic approach on sustainability that includes social aspects, and I mean economic aspects in a bank goes without saying. So we have, of course, this debate, why don't you step out of gas? Why do you still finance this? Why don't you only finance green assets? But we believe a development bank has to take into consideration social aspects. We will not step out of student loans. We will not step out of the child allowance subsidy for building houses in Germany. And we will not step out of refugee projects, even if they are not green. So, but you have to defend this, and you have to have sound data. Very, very difficult, this public discussions, because it's much easier to go green and switch off all the other activities. The other question is difficulty. a role of a development bank to go forward in the context of sustainability when it is not 100% in line what your government is doing. So if you are more ambitious than your shareholder, you have some discussions. How do we tackle it? I mean, German government is big, so you have different actors. And we are, for instance, also doing somehow political work. We are part of the Council on Sustainable Finance of Germany and using all our connections with the government. And then we learned in this project, very important to convince the staff that business opportunities don't vanish. You find new business opportunities. I also believe that sustainability is a competitive factor for the European industry, but we have to convince all the staff in the bank that they can make more business when they opt for sustainable investments. But they have to believe it, because they're coming from other systems where they are much KPI turnaround driven. So we have to introduce this system also with the employees, and we work hard on that. But that's a bunch of difficulties. But at the end, if you have enough resources and the backing from the CEO, you can manage it.
Karine, about implementation, you mentioned your Terra approach. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, maybe first one sentence response. I do see our clients moving. It's not that nothing is happening. Maybe there's not enough that's happening, but I do see that whether it's a sustainability improvement loan or the people on the street or the dollars at home, I do see people moving. And that is very impressive. We need to move faster, we need to move more, but it's not that there's a bit of a standstill, not at all. Now, on the Terra approach, what we said is we're going to look at our whole portfolio, and we do it sector by sector. And we do it as an open source approach, what means we are working with everybody who wants to work with us to define what needs to happen in each and every sector to meet the Paris Agreement. And we do that with research partners to define a scenario for the future. So it's not looking back what is not green enough in the past, it's really looking forward. And then last September, we published our first Terra progress report, and we basically very transparent said per sector, this is what we now think the scenario is going to be. This is where we as ING are, and this is what we still need to do. So to make it very concrete, for example, the power generation, what we were just talking about, ING is outperforming the market. But I don't think the market is going that well. But we committed to step out of coal a long time ago. We invest already since years heavily in green energy, so we are outperforming the market. But the market has to step up. So that's a question, how can we push that? And we heard a lot of suggestions here, so that is in power generation. Another sector, of course, is the automotive industry. When you look at the automotive industry, the scenario there tells you that it's actually going too slowly now, but there will be an acceleration 5 to 7 years to come. The scientists are still defining it fully. And that makes sense, because what I see also in the automotive industry when I talk to clients is these companies have become very, very aware of the transition they need to go through. But it takes time. It takes time to get the diesel out. It takes time to build new cars. But once they put all their investments in it, it will accelerate. And one way to accelerate that is, again, at the offer side. So we just did 1 billion, I think, Schuldschein, green Schuldschein with Porsche in Germany to move them to go faster. And then maybe a less positive example for us, at least, is the cement industry. I must say, before we did it, I wasn't aware what the impact of the cement industry overall is. It's the third largest sector. And we're not that good at it. So we have to get better at it. We have to research it better. We have to understand better what we need to do in that sector to move forward. Two other sectors we're pretty good at is real estate and commercial housing. But there what you see, especially in commercial housing, and you know it from all the commercial housing projects, we need to do a lot. If you just look at how the buildings are old, are not renovated, a lot needs to happen in that market. And now with the mortgages in the Netherlands, for instance, we actually offer green mortgages to consumers, and we also push the developers to develop, renovate green buildings. But a lot still needs to happen, but we report on it very transparently together with the research partners who tell us what needs to happen in each and every of those sectors that we're active.
Thank you. Rémi, I come back to you, this question of the transformative effect you want to enforce, to reinforce, I would say. How can you do it on the countries, on the projects?
In 2015, I was with Laurent Fabius, Laurent Stubiana, in a team that negotiated COP21. So what we are talking about, Article 2.1c, and I remember all year long, with your help, many in the room, we tried, we succeeded, lit up somehow, have each segment of the financial sector say something before COP21. And of course, now 5 years after, and with COP25 starting next week, and with a bit like between Lima and Paris in 2014, 2015, a year to reach Glasgow and COP26, which is so important, as you know, in the process, and which is different from COP21 because we will not negotiate a treaty. It's extremely important that and Finance for Tomorrow will play a crucial role. Certainly, that in the year we have before us, again, each segment say something stronger to make it a success by Glasgow. To do it individually and, of course, in the end, collectively. So after 2015, I left the government and I turned to AFD. We built an alliance with Caisse des Dépôts in France, and I had the honor to chair IDFC. So my role right now is to with colleagues, CEOs, to work on the public bank contribution to this effort. And I think that these institutions, they certainly have a very special role to play. They, as you know, they are the ones that are the closest to the government, though following the public mandate. They are the ones that have the capacity to strengthen demand, to assess very specifically the projects. They have historically the role to connect, finance, enable, and they're big. I mean, when you add the financial capacities of all public institutions, we don't know, and nobody knows, but my guess is we are around $2 trillion a year. So there are 20 trillion global investments a year. So maybe it means that there are 10% public finance. So it's not budget. I mean, it's not grants, but somehow it's longer, cheaper. So really the question is, what could we say collectively in our role by next year? It's not easy, of course, because you remember someone said 30 years ago, I think it was called the Washington Consensus or something like that, that we should die. Probably because we were public. But the good news is that we are still there. And there are many institutions. As soon as a country becomes a lower middle income, reach that threshold, it creates a development bank. That's automatic. And the poorer countries are covered by regional banks. So it's a really global architecture of financial instruments. And my point is, could we clarify by next year our value proposal a bit in this new context of climate and SDGs? And of course, not I don't like the word subsidiarity, crowding out, crowding. It's from the past, especially because many private actors, they turn to us right now to de-risk, to help. So we're in a very different context, but this context is not, in my view, clear enough. And we haven't received a mandate, a set of incentives that is consistent and strong enough collectively. And there are many people, so we have a very simple idea within IDFC, proposal, dream, I don't know. The idea is, why not invite all these guys in a room with stakeholders around, challenging, because they're not perfect at all, challenging them, pressing them, and see what can come out of such a meeting. You will have many people nobody knows. They're not in this room, clearly. But they are very important because they are the one, like we did in the past in our countries, that will transform, structure local financial systems in local currency, able to discuss with the governments, knowing the clients, being our partners abroad. So that's the idea we have. Of course, try to do it before COP26, to have a say in the discussion. Maybe do it in Paris, I don't know. We'll see.
Good idea.
But the idea really is try to gather them all and see how useful they can be, not for themselves again, but for their clients and for the whole financial sector ecosystem represented here.
In fact, you want to push the political role and political levy of the public development banks, whatever they are, domestic or international. Okay, because we are on the policy side, but it's of course connected with the alignment issue. Karine, your former minister in your country, what kind of now you are on the other side, but what kind of political support, public policy support you call for?
Well, I think first of all, I strongly believe in the own responsibilities of companies. We need to take our responsibility. We cannot wait for the government to put a policy into place. We cannot wait for our investors to push us. We have our own responsibility as companies and as leaders in those companies. But we need to do it together. At COP21, it was for the first time in my life that I saw the companies actually pushing and politics following, and that was very inspiring, but also very necessary. But where we are now, we need to do it together. We need the companies and we need politics. And if you look at politics, I think there is one big debate that needs to be resolved, that's carbon pricing. We need to get to a real good carbon pricing, and we need to do it at least a European level, preferably global, but that's not going to happen soon, but European level. And I think that's where the French government and the Dutch government as well, they really play their role, but they need to get the other governments to get along. And I think for the companies is to take our responsibility, do our part, and be transparent about it. Say what you do what you say. Those two things are really important, and that will inspire others to follow as well. And at least then I can still come home to my daughters and say, yes, I try to save your future.
Thank you. Excuse me, I was just looking to the clock. Yes, I have a question for François. During the preparation talks, you told me that you could find the good examples of what you see in the changing of the behaviors of your customers.
Sure. I think the question is to be mainstream. What is mainstream? The large companies, of course, it's more about large companies here, but the large companies, they cannot not be mainstream. And I had a lunch a few months back with the CEO of a client company, and we were exchanging on his strategy. He told me, I know you don't like coal, but I think it's great returns. Maybe we'll continue to expand it. So, we'll not finance it. He said, I know. A few weeks later, he had to announce a different strategy under the pressure of the financial community. And I think That's how finance will have an impact on the client side, and already has an impact on the client side, which is all the companies are wondering what will be accepted. And what we have to define is exactly that. What is acceptable? So far, it's difficult to define for every sector, and Catherine was saying there's some work, there's a lot of progress. That's what we need to do, is to continue to progress, and that's what we believe is we need all the different actors on the finance industry to innovate, to provide ideas, to provide research, to progressively come to a consensus on what should be accepted, what shouldn't be accepted as mainstream, to include that in the pricing, as Catherine was saying, about, if you're not mainstream, but you are going to be high yield, and you are more risky. If you are very mainstream or better than mainstream, then you are very sustainable. And that's what we need. Of course, and I echo what Catherine was saying, if we receive financial signals like carbon price, that will be easier and quicker, because it's easier to align everyone on financials than on assessment of impact. But even if we don't have that, we need to really come to a global definition of what is mainstream, what is acceptable. That's why we share a lot with all the other financial players, and we were sharing with Chinese people yesterday about the green weighting factor. They asked us to go to China to explain more. I think we need these global discussions to, at the end, have common standards that will become the standards of the industry. It will take more time if we don't receive, I would say, pricing signals on how externalities have to be included. But I think we are progressing in the right direction. The question is really the question of the pace. But again, there's some momentum. The clients are moving. The large companies, on the smaller ones, it's more difficult. The large companies are moving, and we need to make sure that if the European banks stop to fund this or that, or that it will not be funded by others, because if it's so, then it has strictly no impact on the environment. That's why we need, Paris agreements are an agreement for the humanity about what we should do, and that's how we should tackle it on the finance world.
Thank you, Matthias. We don't have much time now. And so I would like to ask, we have seen that, in fact, the question of implementation is a very difficult question, but I think that what you demonstrate, all of you, that is that alignment is not a free lunch. I mean, it's demanding, and demanding for now, for concrete action, immediate concrete action. It's not because you align on 2050 goal that you are not obliged to. So I think it was the purpose, in fact, of the discussion, to be clear, at least to be clear about that. There is two questions. I would like to have your ideas about that, but very, very quickly. The first one is, what about the proof? What about the convincing the stakeholders about the credibility of this method? And the second one, and sorry for just leaving 3 minutes on that, is the link with the next panel, the Just Transition, and so through the question of alignment of the SDGs. So sorry, you will not have time to deal with that, but I will ask the first question to Karine and François, how to deal with the stakeholders. How to deal to the stakeholders, I'm sorry. And to Matthias, Jürgen, and Rémi, about the question of the link with the SDGs.
How to align the stakeholders? I think it's fairly simple in a sense and very difficult at the same time. The stakeholders that are willing to be aligned, it's fairly easy. You involve them in your discussions, you get their input, you explain what you're doing, and together you develop new methodologies and new goals. The ones with whom you're not aligned, and there are also out there people who are not aligned with it yet, it's hard work, and you have to do it every day again. But I think overall, as a bank, what we need to do is we need to continue to push this, so do what we promised and actually do more. We need to continue to have the dialogue also with the clients, the stakeholders who are less convinced or who feel they can do it later or who even might be a little bit free rider. If the others do it, I can do less. And really make it part of our conversations and of the offer that we do. If you don't have a sustainability strategy, we're not even starting our dialogue with you. You have to have your sustainability vision on how you're going to help with this transition. And finally, for me, myself, it's very simple. I already said it before. I can't come home if I don't do something ambitious about this. My daughters will not let me in the door if I don't solve it today.
Well, I think that today we see an evolution on that because we have been pushed by the NGOs to improve, and today what we see is that the authorities, the Financial Market Authority in France, the supervisor of banks is tackling the issue. There are some workshops to define rules, to define transparency on what we do on this topic. So I think it's very positive because that will give transparency and no more controversy on how we deal with these things. And what I can tell you is when we, I saw the color of our portfolio. The first question is, are we going to publish it? And we decided, yes, we are going to publish it. And of course, today, what we do in the brown side is a lot. But this transparency is the best way to align with stakeholders and to make sure that we evolve, in the next years.
Matthias?
I'll be very quick. I think the key is now walk the talk. Not just we around this table here, but all of you in the room have made enough commitments, have shown engagement. Now it's time to execute and to do things. And I think that needs to be integrated in the day-to-day activities, and that means stay focused on climate, but don't forget the other aspects of ESG as well. And if that's about social impact investing, if that's about land degradation projects that need to be done, it's doing this. And lastly, never forget communication. Never forget that the retail client needs to follow us and needs to be convinced that what we do as a responsible investor is good for him and that he accepts and he buys into that.
Thank you, Matthias. Jürgen.
So the question on the SDGs, right? So what my recommendation would also, to quote our digital techie colleagues, is stop starting, start finishing. And if you say, as a development bank, it's not only climate, and that's very important. It's sustainability in all three dimensions. You have to be good about your impact. You have to have the impact data. For instance, we did a SDG mapping on our portfolio. We can see that 97% of our commitments contribute to one or more SDGs. We can see that it's based mainly climate, sustainable cities, work, and clean energy. And so we had created this transparency, what you need absolutely if you not only want to go on the climate side. So impact measurement is very important.
Thank you, Jürgen. And Rémi?
Climate, carbon neutrality is the front line. It's the spur. It's where innovation happens. But the end game, it's SDGs. And the two agenda, we all know by 2030 or by 2050, probably they will merge. They will merge, but what we are building together, and in each and every institution represented here, is the contribution to SDGs. I mean, Yellow Jackets in France, just transition in South Africa. what is happening in China, I mean, it builds from here. And we phrased it within AFD, we say we want the agency to be 100% Paris Agreement, but at the same time, we want to be 100%, we say, social link. And we try to verify, like François, in each and every project that it means not 200%, but 100% for each, and that we can reach the level of dialogue with the governments and the other on this nexus. That's where we are, all of us. That's very, very mysterious, of course, and challenging. And I agree with François. We need a global framework, legitimate UN. I mean, to emerge and direct all actors. So ESG, we can call it ESG. We can call it impact. We can call it within IDFC. We say sustainable development investment, whatever. But it's still, it has at a time to be synthesized to be collective enough.
Thank you all for your serious, your commitment, your passion, in fact, and for what you do. I think is very inspiring for everybody, and I think we can applaud them. Thank you.